I cannot tell you how long I've been waiting for this. Nash was part of the foundation for my favorite dearly departed automaker, AMC. I need to hear the cast iron rumble of the 1500cc Austin B-Series engine to summon me from your mom's house and deposit my sandpaper grown man ass cheeks into this aging movie theater upholstery from a time before reserved seating. Oh, I'm just gonna buy my ticket and pray I came early enough to not have to sit in the first row because icy hot is expensive and I've already taken the maximum allowable dosage of ibuprofen today. I literally don't have the money to crane my neck just to look up Tom Hanks's nose. Nash Metropolitan, deliver me from my present and unto the glories past whence you came. Yeah, let's try that again. Go forth, Nash Metropolitan, and deliver! So I'm the Roman, and this is Race to the Bottom, where I search for the worst car on Earth, and this has never happened before. For the first time, I can't drive this car. Just like Gen Z in the eyes of every boomer who doesn't know any better, this car doesn't work. At this rate, I don't even know if I'll be able to make a full review. It's a full review and I can't hold back. A new review of a small old Nash. 1962 Nash Metropolitan. Sure, driving an antique car is cool. But you know what's cooler? Not driving it and letting the fantasy live a little longer. This car is gorgeous, and like most gorgeous things, it gives off a very look but don't touch vibe. She's here for admiring, not for operating. Our volunteer, Nick, is a returnee, as I reviewed his Dodge Durango back in September, and this Metropolitan was originally going to be the Christmas special, but it had some work scheduled to be performed on it to make it roadworthy, and it wasn't going to be ready in time, so we pushed it back. Now, mind you, we had zero plans to film this in the snow, obviously, because why would you ever do that? But both Nick and I looked at the weather map for our area, and we weren't even supposed to get snow until 2 hours after we would have been done filming. But you know, this is on me, because I forgot the number one rule of Pennsylvania weather, which is that the weather employs meteorologists, not the other way around. It's going to do whatever it feels like doing, and not Glenn Hurricane Schwartz or Punxsutawney Phil can do a damn thing about it. So right off rip, the elements are against us. And God bless him, Nick tried to get this engine to turn over, and absolutely nothing happened. He tried carb cleaner, he tried charging the battery, 12-volt positive ground, which is rare since according to Nick, most of the cars with positive grounding are 6-volt. But again, no luck. We even tried the classic method of just letting it sit for a while to see if she'd eventually snap out of whatever funk kept it inoperable, like an Android phone subjected to a single drop of water. And this was just not gonna happen for us. So in lieu of talking about driving experience, I'm going to talk about the background of this car and what it represents. Sort of like a mini installment of RCR stories. Cheap plug, but right now on our Patreon is an early release of the first new RCR stories in over 2 years. Check it out now at our Patreon, the link is in the description. But generally speaking, the broad strokes of the Metropolitan suggest a car that's more of a pioneer than you'd think, even as it never really evolved to a point that justified its continued existence, because preparing for the future is for people who expect to live past 25. Alright, so even though the term subcompact wasn't yet in use in the early 1950s, when this hit the market in December 1953, this was the first subcompact from an American car company. And yeah, it was assembled in England and then brought over here, whatever. It still runs on Pilsner and ground-up Letterman jackets. This car is so quintessentially post-war America that every time you start her up, she might as well offer you a cigarette and a subpoena from Joseph McCarthy. This is more 50s than a father of 8 who still relies on the pull-out method. Because make no mistake, while this is a 1962 model year car, it really does feel like it's from the earlier decade. Even as they made design changes like a one-piece rear window and an increased compression ratio, these changes didn't really seem to make the car feel any more modern to a newer generation of young drivers. Or for adult drivers, for that matter, who were choosing the Volkswagen Beetle by a factor of 5.5 to 1, according to Consumer Guide. There never seemed to be much in the way of forward thinking when it came to this car. No real preparation for the future beyond mechanically pumping out new annual editions. It was the WWE 2K of its time. As the story goes, independent automaker Nash Motors was looking to go smaller as a bit of counter-programming to the American size fixation that resulted in the post-war land barges we'd see throughout the 1950s. But much like the Fourth Doctor's regeneration, this was something prepared for long before it actually happened, as Nash had been planning prototypes for years, even going so far as to put one on display at the Waldorf Astoria in New York to gauge public reaction. Of course, this was a notable car for many reasons, but one of the chief among them was that this was among the first cars in the United States to be marketed directly to women. Not just those in the ever-growing workforce, but homemakers looking to become a two-car family. So this needed to be affordable, since part of its appeal was that it could be a low-frills commuter car, probably akin to what we think of as a city car today. Something small and nimble that could be maneuvered in and out of tight spots. Maybe not that powerful, but powerful enough, and not that sporty, but making up the difference in style and curb appeal. But ironically, producing a low-cost car in-house was too expensive, so Nash partnered with Austin Motor Company to do the assembly from parts that would be provided by manufacturing company Fisher & Ludlow. And so in that way, this became one of the first American production cars, if not the first, someone in the comments please correct me if I'm wrong, to be completely assembled overseas. And this allowed Nash to keep costs down at a time when they could ill afford the expense of building a car this ambitious here. You see, in 1937, Nash Motors boss Charles W. Nash merged his company with the Kelvinator Corporation, a kitchen appliance company run by businessman George W. Mason. Nash Kelvinator then merged with fellow automaker Hudson, resulting in the American Motors Corporation on May 1st, 1954. By the time AMC had been created, the Metropolitan had already been released, having come to North America in December 1953. But the significance is in how Nash's partnerships allowed the car to even make it to the public in the first place, because independent automakers didn't have the easiest go of it in the 1950s, any more than they do now. I go into exhaustive detail about all of this in my RCR stories on the life and death of AMC, and I'm sorry for the constant cheap plugs, but I really do think you'll enjoy it, and also I'm a slave to the rhythm of the grind. But I digress, because one of the consequences of this merger was that Hudson dealers received Nash Metropolitans that were rebadged as Hudsons. As a result, in the months following its arrival in North America, the Metropolitan was marketed as both a Hudson and a Nash. Of course, there weren't really any differences other than the emblems, so it stayed this way for 3 years until both the Nash and Hudson marks were dropped in favor of just calling it the Metropolitan. This 1962 model was from the Metropolitan's final model year, in that last Series 4 model generation, which had debuted in 1959, but by that point the car was on the wane, and by 1962 it was pretty much outdated. It didn't perform as well as its contemporaries, and that suburban style was becoming tacky to rebellious, countercultural eyes. But then, in the grand arc of this car's significance, it managed to become enough of a part of the American automotive cultural moment that it attained a sort of immortality. This car hit the market in the prime years of the commodification of cars, because cars weren't always affordable to everyone, and even when they were, not everyone had them because of issues like road infrastructure and maintenance costs. But over time, even through the Roaring '20s into the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II, cars became necessities. They were sort of like smartphones. Sure, you could hold out forever if you wanted to, but the momentum of society favored mechanical and technological progress. But then World War II happened, and domestic car production was put on hold. And there wasn't a domestic auto industry. There just wasn't. Everything was redirected towards the war effort. So when cars went back into production in the aftermath, people were ready to buy. Baby boomers happened because people wanted to root around like oyster-stuffed jackrabbits after years of going without, but also because it was a physical celebration of reunion. It was joy, relief, longing, and love. And yes, carnality, sure. But all of these things were coming together in this burst of post-war optimism, and so birth rates shot up and so did the economy. And the exact same thing happened with cars. These stylish pontoon cars were the result of designers with 5 years of pent-up artistic energy. So now we've got bigger windows, long, unbroken lines, and colors that pop, all to reflect the newfound optimism of the post-war era. Cars became less about necessity, although they were still about that, but they veered closer back to what they had initially been. Status symbols. Commodities. A nice thing to have. A nicer thing to be seen having. Because here comes the monolithic, unlubricated shaft of capitalism to slide into the velvety folds of progress. God bless America. God bless this American-made car that we had assembled by Europeans back when they were technically still Europeans. And God bless this tiny hunk of metal that drives women wild. Because look at it. Now for his part, Nick is planning to convert this from positive to negative ground to allow for an upgraded distributor and a Holley Sniper carb to try and get some semblance of reliability out of this thing. Because you don't get a whole lot from factory. You get around 55 horsepower and 82 pound-feet of torque, matched to a 3-speed manual column shift transmission with no synchros. Interestingly, this is mostly unmodified outside of the purple paint job, as this used to be red, but being mostly unmodified doesn't mean it doesn't still need a ton of work. Nick told me he isn't even sure the fuel gauge is accurate, because it hasn't been operated long enough to go through a full tank yet. That's about 10 gallons or so. Other issues. The water pump had previously failed due to the lack of a temperature gauge. It also ended up needing piston rings as well. Mind you, this is a motor from a 1959 model, since no mechanic wanted to touch the stock motor. Nick told me that if the negative ground fix with the distributor and Holley carb don't work, then he's pretty much giving up on the original British drivetrain altogether. Now, visually, it's hard not to love this, even if classic American cars aren't your thing. It's like somebody hit a 1950s land barge with a shrink ray. And really, the aesthetic is the appeal here, because it's certainly not going to be functionality. In 2 years of owning this, Nick has only been able to manage 50 untroubled miles of driving. And while I can't speak to the quality of the driving itself, Nick wouldn't have submitted this to Race to the Bottom if he didn't think it was genuinely one of the worst cars you could ever be tasked with driving. Whether from the severe body roll, the far inset wheels, and huge turning radius resulting in really wonky handling, or the lack of a tachometer, temperature gauge, or really any gauges that will clue you in to the car's oncoming demise. It's just rough. And while I'm not sure we should ever expect the world of a car that's damn near 70 years old, there is something to be said for how quickly this became obsolete once the big three got into the compact market in earnest, with stuff like the Falcon and the Valiant and the Corvair. Sure, this was smaller and arguably more attractive, but in a more novel way, like when a soda company goes with retro packaging. It's cool because it's an anachronism, which suggests the exclusivity of a limited run, because the Metropolitan was here for a good time, not a long time. Which is why I keep coming back to the same philosophical concept: future self-continuity. It's that feeling of connection between our present and future selves. The greater the connection we feel with our future selves, the likelier it is that we'll do things in the present to make life better for that future self. The Nash Metropolitan had the opportunity to evolve with its time as the market became more accepting of compacts. But from everything I've read and seen, it doesn't seem like it ever truly did. The people in charge were looking ahead to the future of the company, but not to the future of the Metropolitan. And so nothing was done in its present to ensure its future. It was the automotive equivalent of... well, it was the automotive equivalent of me. From my late teens to basically my mid to late 20s, I didn't really do much for my future self because I didn't really like my present self. This was probably at its worst when I was 16 or 17, because I'd go to the arcade with my friends and I'd lug my oversized late 90s, early 2000s camcorder everywhere, and keep a record of my thoroughly banal adventures. In the mall where, unbeknownst to me, Brian was working at the time as part of the camera shop there. So it's possible that I met Brian or encountered him years before I actually met the guy, so it's wild to think about. But in those years, I never really thought about future me, and I don't think that's just because of my age, because I don't think every teen is like that. Most think about what they want to do for the future, or if they want to be a parent someday, or if they want to own a house, what they want their life to look like, and I just didn't think about any of those things. All I knew was that I wanted to write. If I thought of the future at all, it was as this nebulous concept, and future me as some guy who magically has it all figured out through processes that 17-year-old me didn't understand and didn't care to. You sort of just expect that future you will have your back, and things will fall into place. Sometimes you're the special kind of stupid I was, where you just assume things happen without anything needing to be done to make them happen. You carry around your camera and you point it at a mirror and you give yourself a pep talk because you assume one day your future self might need to see it. But like anybody who's ever filmed fireworks, you know you're never going to watch it back. It's just there to stand as a record that you were young once, that you once knew the freedom of allowable stupidity, because society expects nothing of you at that age. The Nash Metropolitan had no future self-continuity. No groundwork was laid for its own survival. Nothing done in its present to ensure its future. And yet, what's remarkable about the Metropolitan is that it debatably proved the market viability of the subcompact to the extent that cars like the Gremlin and the Pacer, and even my dream car, the AMC Eagle, were able to become a reality. And while these cars didn't exactly last either, I truly believe they're cars that the automotive world was better for having. Basically, through no real preservation efforts of its own, the Metropolitan was a pioneer simply by virtue of its existence. Call me hyperbolic, but I believe the world is better for the Metropolitan having been here. In that same way, maybe the Metropolitan isn't a symbol of future self-continuity, but a symbol for us. And I know this is going to sound pretentious, because it is, but I also mean it. even if we don't have it all figured out, I'm convinced that whether it's just for a moment or for an entire lifetime, the world is better for each of us having been on it. Now, obviously, since I didn't drive this, I can't put it on either the top 5 or bottom 5 list, so the rankings remain the same. However, Nick does hope to give me a chance to drive this once it's running, so maybe we'll revisit it at some point in the future. But I'd sincerely like to thank Nick for his time, his patience, and just for being a great sport about everything. Now, if you think you have the car that can win the race to the bottom, a car so irredeemable not even I would enjoy it, shoot me an email at regularcarstheroman@gmail.com. regularcarstheroman@gmail.com. We can only accept volunteers willing to meet us out here in southeastern Pennsylvania, but if that sounds like you, drop me a line. Also, right now on Patreon, just a reminder, an early release for patrons only. The first RCR Stories in 2 years is now live. So if you want to check it out, please consider supporting us on Patreon, since that is really the only way it's possible for me to make those videos anymore. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, sharing the video, or even subscribing. And if you do subscribe, be sure to tap the bell icon so you're notified for every new video. Lastly, check out our new merchandise at the link in the description and on the shelf below the video. For each new order, I'll be sending out personalized thank you messages. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your week. You're a purple people pleaser, and I know that you didn't want to go. It's okay, you didn't start, we made the show. I still want to drive you though. I do realize you're old, but let's realign our goals. Even if you end up driving slow, you're a purple people pleaser, and I know. You're a purple people pleaser, and I know.